because you need to inspire people. You don't need to tell people, you need to inspire people. And storytelling is a great mechanism to do that. And you'll see entrepreneurs are brilliant storytellers, and it's the way they actually get investment, funding, because they can tell a great story, right? And investors love it. And normally the founder themselves, and I've met so many brilliant entrepreneurial people that actually founded their own business because of their entrepreneurialism, because of their individual passion for something. Was the reason why that business was created in the first place. Yet they want people to basically follow what they say as soon as they hire. When actually the reason why they were there was because of that freedom. Every 2 weeks we then delivered something new, right? Whereas this other bank, 18 months. So the speed of change in a small organisation, much more nimble, much more able to see an opportunity, see a challenge, see an issue, and get around the table, make a decision and see a change is much, much more rapid and therefore much more highly engaging.
Driving productivity, performance activity, like business or electricity, results to infinity.
Welcome to Driving Productivity with Harjit Chadha. I'm here today with the amazing and delightful Stewart Bromley.
Sure. Yeah,
So, Stewart, full disclosure, you used to be my boss at one time, and you were amazing, absolutely brilliant in the way you coached and got the best out of people. And so it's a real pleasure to talk to you today. On this show, we're going to talk about growth mindsets. This podcast is all about productivity. As you know, there's a productivity puzzle in the UK. Our productivity is still 6 out of 7 in the G7. I think there's a lot of things we can do. People gravitate towards AI and technology, but actually there's some stuff that we can do fairly quickly in organisations, large and small, and a lot of that is to do with mindset. So today we're going to talk about growth mindsets, why it's important, how it impacts both engagement, innovation, and productivity. But first of all, Stewart, credentials.
Credentials. Well, I guess I've been lucky to work for various blue chip organisations internationally, so all over Europe and a couple of years in the US. Started off very much on technical driven change, I guess is the best way of describing it. In places like Ford Motor Company and O2. But actually, over a number of years, gravitated to more humanistic change, so cultural change. And, some of the things I guess we'll probably touch on a bit today. So actually, I've sort of consulted into HR, I've held HR directorships. And as the years gone by, I sort of started off in very large organisations like Ford's, 600,000 employees at the time. And I sort of worked my way down to startups. So my last full-time role was with Atom Bank as both Chief Operating Officer, Chief Technology Officer. I was actually officially the first employee of the bank.
Oh, wow.
And literally built the bank. I was responsible for building the bank in the early years and then running all the operations and technology for periods after that. So fantastic time, really enjoyed it. But I guess I've seen everything then from startup all to sort of the major corporate world internationally. So I guess I've got a fair amount.
I think you've got enough there, haven't you? Okay, brilliant. So before we dive into it, what do you do outside of work?
Well, do you know, I sort of semi-retired a few years ago, and I do a bit of cycling, so I'm a bit more active. You want to turn right here, Roger? But actually, the one thing that I guess I'm surprised that I've been getting into is fishing. So I used to fish as a kid.
Yeah.
But I haven't fished since about the age of about 13, 14. And when I sort of retired a few years ago, I said to the guys at work, I said, I really want to take up a bit of fly fishing. So
right, okay.
So they told me what to get when I went. There was an expert at work at Twitty. He sort of gave me the ideas about what rods and reels and all this sort of stuff. And started off doing a bit of fly fishing, which I just loved being out there, but wasn't very good at it. Still not very good at it. Still very amateurish.
Have you read the book?
I've read various books. With YouTube these days, every day. But then, but when a mate of mine said, "Why don't you try a bit of carp fishing as well?" So I went out with him carp fishing, and I have to say, yeah, I just find it absolutely fantastic. Where I go carp fishing, in the summer, you can literally have a strong knock bite every 5 to 10 minutes. You can be catching a fish every 20, and when you're sat out in the tranquility, just with the sound of the birds, honestly, it's just. Having worked in very high pressurized, highly responsible jobs with loads of stress, sitting out, normally in the sunshine, because I'm a fair weather fisherman in the main, in a lake with nature and not a sound to hear other than the nature, it is just a fantastic day. I have to say, mindful.
That sounds wonderful. Now, I have to say, I've never done any fishing, but you've made it sound like the most amazing pastime.
If you haven't tried it, you've got to give it a go. Just for the mindfulness and the tranquility. Whether you catching a fish is a bonus.
Just going to Murgatroyd's count. For those listening, that's an amazing fish and chip shop up in the north. Okay, that's great. Well, look, let's get into it. Growth mindsets. Tell me about growth mindsets and why it's important.
Well, I think the philosophy around growth mindsets versus fixed mindsets goes back to, I guess, the early 2000s. It's been around a while, but there's different categorizations. But typically, someone who has a growth mindset is much more curious. They're into development and progression. Mm-hmm. They want to learn. Ultimately, they want to continue better themselves, better what they do. Whereas someone with a more fixed mindset is more happy doing the same thing day in, day out, steady Eddie. Doesn't want to challenge status quo, and ideally they want to do the same thing, do their 9 to 5, get paid. Then come in next day and do exactly the same thing again. So, and I guess the reason why growth mindsets are so important to me, it's a lot to do with change. And that is, there is no job these days that's steady. It is status quo. Whether you want it to be or not is irrelevant. The world's changing, competition's changing, customer needs are constantly changing, evolving. And therefore businesses to succeed need to continually evolve their processes, their products, their services. And those that do tend to win. And I think from that perspective, you really need people who are much more mentally agile, much more up for the challenge, taking ownership and responsibility, and the growth mindset facilitates that much better than a fixed mindset.
Okay, we're turning right at the roundabout. Left. Okay, so it's really interesting because a recent survey, there was an interesting fact that said people with a growth mindset are 65% more likely to rate higher in a performance appraisal than those with a fixed mindset. HBR did a survey back in 2014, and they found that people with a fixed mindset are more likely to find shortcuts or cheat the system because of the environment they work in. So I think it's a really powerful sort of starting point. So we think about the growth mindset. Let's talk about organisations and engagement. There's a big push for engaged organisations. We have internal NPS scores and such like. How does the growth mindset facilitate engagement in an organisation?
Well, I think there's a number of ways if you ask that question. I think the companies tend to operate in a number of different cultural guises, and some are very process centric and basically want to script everything that happens, and then control and monitor people's activities to those scripts. And they tend to be very conformist organisations and actually play better to fixed mindset capabilities. They don't tend to have very high engagement scores, interestingly, because there's very little freedom, there's very little ownership. Because if you tell someone what to do and you're monitoring to do exactly what you told them to do, you're not relinquishing any responsibility. You're the one responsible. Because if it goes wrong, they're just going to blame you. Whereas in a culture that's much more about allowing people to take full ownership of what they do. They tend to have coaching much more as a discipline than sort of coercive leadership styles. They're there to help people find their own paths in terms of how they do things.
Yeah.
The ownership then relies with the individual, and then individuals that flourish in their life are absolutely fully engaged because they're taking full control themselves. It's about them.
Yeah.
And you tend to find that the engagement levels in organisations that trade that and play to those individual talents that individual need tend to outperform an engagement level than everybody else. And obviously engagement then drives better customer satisfaction, better productivity, better efficiencies, better utilisation, all the rest of the productivity style metrics. So you'll see that come through. I think you touched on something a minute ago as well, which is around measuring. How you measure. And I guess when we were at First Stretch, we did a bit of a study on this. And we were looking to introduce time-based rotations, which is a long story. I think a very interesting thing. Because when I was at Ford, we had time-based rotations. And the whole logic was about maximising potential of the organisation.
Yeah.
Because if you think about potential of an individual, you have to think about capabilities, experience, and desire. Then that tends to be the three main constructs of it. And if you ask a manager who's rated someone with high potential, this is about performance potential.
Yes.
They tend to write people who have just come into their teams, who are accelerating their learning, accelerating their experience, much higher from a potential than potentially people that have been in for a long time and have stagnated, because they might still be performing very well, but their potential might be rated much lower because they're stagnated. They're not accelerating their learning. They're doing the same thing over and over again, which is back to sort of fixed. And therefore there's great logic, which is if you want to maximize potential, you should maximize change, and therefore facilitate movements, job swaps, get people to change roles. So you don't have to wait for a vacancy to be available. You can actually then facilitate a person A moving to person's B job, B to A, or whole chains of movement. And in that way, you're facilitating people's continual development, even if being lateral. But the point then is you're accelerating the potential of the organisation. Yeah. And there is actually quite good logic to that. And again, that plays to actually developing a growth mindset culture because you're continually being stretched and learning.
There's another interesting side effect as well, which is there was a survey conducted in 2024 by HR magazine. And they found that 40% more trust in the organisation, in an organisation that encourage growth mindsets. And if you can trust your peers and your superiors and your team, then you're on a sort of a winning sort of line there, aren't you? Trajectory.
I think part of that is actually to going back to that curiosity. In a fixed mindset environment, people don't necessarily want to rock the boat. They want to keep steady state. And therefore, people are less curious, right? If you're developing potential and developing freedom of expression and allowing your people to challenge, then they're going to ask the difficult questions. So what you'll find is in growth mindset organizations, the organizations tend to be significantly more open in their wranglings and their dealings. There's no hiding this. They tend to tell things as they are. Yeah. And actually, because engagement is high and higher in those organizations, they tend to actually be completely free with the challenges and what's happening, because normally the best solutions come from their own people in terms of how they resolve it. Right? So they're actually engaged in actually the solutioning and the strategy of the company itself. So much more.
Absolutely. And around that, there's some really interesting phrases that I've heard in my career that would help you identify a closed mindset organisation. Things like, we've done that before, it didn't work. We're too busy for that. I've always done it this way and it works. So that's the kind of language, and that sort of continues then, doesn't it, in an organisation where they're close to change. So engagement, trust, all really powerful factors, and they then lead to things like innovation, don't they? So, let's talk about growth mindset and innovation, and what we mean by innovation, because it's not just technology, is it?
No, not at all. No, I think everyone has a has a role in innovation. Right? Everyone has a piece to play in that puzzle. I'm very anti people who have innovation teams because they tend to be some sort of secret like department sat in some white tower, completely devoid of any real sort of operational
Men in black, so to speak.
And actually, innovation very rarely occurs in this style of organisations. The organisations tend to operate better is when everyone has sees as an integral part of their role. They need to innovate. Now, whether that's how they do their day job, whether it's around procedural change, process change, whether it's to actually do with they've identified because they're talking to customers or whatever enhancements to the products or services, they all have a voice and all have the ability to raise that voice to drive innovation with the company. And again, when it comes to execution of innovation, companies that thrive on having engaged employees coming up with the ideas in the first place tend to deliver the innovation more successfully than companies that are trying to do it from some sort of secret squirrel type outfit somewhere hidden in a back office. Because again, just the level of acceptance around what they're doing and why it's important is almost immediately brought in from the word go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, let's think about the smaller organisations. There's 5.5 million SMEs or thereabouts in the UK, employing 16 million people. I passionately believe that if we can turn the dial up a little bit with those organisations, usually sort of 1 to 10 people, it'll make a huge difference in terms of productivity. How is this relevant to the smaller organisations?
It's incredibly relevant. So in smaller organisations, it's typical that your roles are more flexible, shall I say?
Yeah.
Because you have to be a jack of all trades to a degree. In large organisations, there will be someone's responsibility somewhere to do something, right? And only that one thing, right? Whereas in small organisations, you tend to have to live a bit more hand to mouth. You're a little bit more responsive to what's happening on the organisation, your customers, your services on a day-to-day basis. So you tend to need to just, bend the rules, bend your role definition to do what's required, right? And therefore the flexibility of a small organisation is much more relevant. Also, decision making is much quicker.
Yeah.
In large organisations, and I can give you a couple of examples. I did some consulting for one bank in their digital team, and their average time to market for a digital change was 18 months. From the start of the project to delivery was 18 months. Was the average. And I don't think they're necessarily the slowest. 18 months. When I worked for Atom, at one stage, we used to run sprints and deliver a change every week. And actually it was too fast, so we ended up slowing it down to every 2 weeks.
Okay.
But every 2 weeks we then delivered something new, right? Whereas, this other bank, 18 months. So the speed of change in a small organisation, much more nimble, much more able to see an opportunity, see a challenge, see an issue, and get round the table, make a decision and see a change is much, much more rapid and therefore much more highly engaging than in static.
Yeah, and is that down to your response to challenges? So that classic growth mindset that any challenge is a learning opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah. There is no barriers in small organisations, and you talked a bit ago about people who have a negative mindset. In a small organisation, there's no space for it. There is no money, for example. There is no time. There is no resource. It is you that's got to take ownership and make something happen, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, you find a way. You absolutely find a way of doing things and making things happen. And it's a much more, I guess, thrilling place to be. Less comfortable though, obviously. There's no safety net. There's no blanket. There's no sugar daddy who's going to take care of you. So it tends to be a lot more pressurized in those types of organizations, but actually a lot more, fulfilling in so many ways.
Fabulous. So have you any sort of real life examples of organizations that are in a growth mindset and what they actually do to enable that growth mindset?
Yeah, so I think, I think first threat overall, and again, in any organisation, there always will be a percentage of fixed mindset people. I don't
Yes.
think you're ever going to get away from that. But as an organisation, I think first threat was very open, growth mindset style organisation. I think we had an awful lot of people willing to go the extra mile.
Yep.
And some of that was created and helped create it. So, for example, we introduced a coaching program. So and coaching is one of these very misunderstood terms. A lot of people say they're a coach and they're not a coach. And a lot of people use the phrase coaching and mentoring in the same sentence. And coaching and mentoring are completely the opposite things. And it's not that mentoring is a bad thing. That's a perfectly good thing. But mentoring is where you're there to impart knowledge, to give knowledge. As a coach, you never give any knowledge. It's all about the questioning, the challenging. You believe the individual has the answers, and it's about facilitating their thinking to come up with the answers, right? And therefore they take much greater responsibility. So coaching was something we introduced big style in first threats. We trained all our leaders at all levels in various levels of coaching techniques. And actually, I think that played massive dividends to the culture overall, because again, you're building much greater responsibility if you go straight on and then left to the next level.
The dialogue changes, doesn't it? At all levels, the dialogue changes.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I mean, because again, I think it's about that accountability piece. People who are truly being coached and being challenged, then again, they know that the onus is on them to come up with the answers, and therefore there is no hiding. You can't just shy away from your day-to-day responsibilities. You have to step up to them.
So how do you go about building an organisation with growth mindsets? Where do you start, particularly for the smaller organisations? The big organisations can write a check and bring people in and run programs. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have or build growth mindsets. But for the smaller organisations, it's a little bit more difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But I think you got to actually start with who you recruit. Interestingly, So, you got to be thinking about the values of the organisation and making sure the values are tuned to drive a growth culture. Curiosity. Play to individual talent, individual need. You've got to be less strict on your roles, and create flexibility and adaptability for people to really excel and be themselves, play to their natural talents. And therefore, how you recruit, who you recruit, is highly important, because if you're just recruiting people like you and people that have got the boxes ticked in terms of qualifications, but don't have the adaptability and the flexibility to do other things, you're really going to constrain yourself to actually how you can use people in the organisation. So who you recruit is absolutely critical to the organisation that the young aspire to be. So that's one thing, and then once you've got people on board, I really do believe in hiring talent and then setting them free, not constraining them, right? So hire people that are talented, and then give them the space to be their best, right?
Now that's a challenge, isn't it? Because small organisations are often founder organisations. For founders to give people freedom is a huge challenge.
It's interesting, isn't it? And normally the founder themselves, and I've met so many brilliant entrepreneurial people that actually founded their own business because of their entrepreneurialism, because of their individual passion for something. Was the reason why that business was created in the first place. Yet they want people to basically follow what they say as soon as they hire. When actually the reason why they were there was because of that freedom. Right? So it's a really interesting dynamic, isn't it? So some of the best entrepreneurs are brilliant entrepreneurs, but actually rubbish CEOs. Right? And they just don't have the skill set to actually build an organisation in a way that then can deliver the ambition that they set out to do. The other thing I see an awful lot with entrepreneur organisations is they start off with all the right ideas. They're really great storytellers, and storytelling is a really important point in this. Because you need to inspire people. You don't need to tell people, you need to inspire people. And storytelling is a great mechanism to do that. And you'll see entrepreneurs are brilliant storytellers, and it's the way they actually get investment funding.
Yeah.
Because they can tell a great story, right? And investors love it. But then you go 3 years down the line, and investors start to get squeaky feet. They want a bit of a return on their investment, obviously.
Yes.
And then they will start to be a little bit more dictatorial in terms of what they want the organization to be. And often I see the entrepreneurs then turning their story to try and appease the investors, and it's almost always the wrong thing to do. The reason why they exist is because they were so inspirational about the story, and they have to stay true to their passion and their belief rather than bending to investor needs. It's a very difficult way to I know it's easy, but
A big piece around self-reflection there, isn't there, before you even get into the sort of recruiting.
so if you can stick to your story, the vision, the reason why you came into being, you can bring so many people with you, and that in its own way helps you develop a growth mindset, because you can get people that really understand why they're there. Right? You don't have to sit and do a load of maths to align objectives. They are absolutely hook, line, and sinker, pulled into the organisation for the right reasons.
Brilliant. Okay, so self-reflection, storytelling, recruitment, thinking about values. What else?
I think then continual challenge in the workplace, that ongoing development opportunity. I think too many performance reviews are very one-sided around performing against a set of pre-canned objectives, rather than thinking around the process and output in terms of speed, velocity, development. And actually organizations that spend more time in developing their people, that potential piece, that coaching piece, is critical to allow people to then continue to enhance their capabilities, whether that's technical skills or personal characteristics, right? And again, that just helps you build that growth organization, because you're developing a curious organization, people who want to do more.
Yeah, that's a really good phrase. It's building curiosity, creating pull, getting people to think about just beyond their work. Sometimes is quite a challenge, isn't it?
It can be a challenge, and sometimes you want people that. And here's another idea for you that we've done at least 2 places of work. People you can't then satisfy their career progression. And actually, you shouldn't constrain them. If you've got no space to allow someone to move into, for whatever reason, and small organisations have this in space, then create an alumni, create porosity, help them move out of the organisation. It sounds like you move them out. But on the basis that you create an alumni where potentially in the future you can move them back in. Further, there is you can create a porosity with your partners, your suppliers. So I've worked in the 2 places where we had strategic partnerships, and we did again job slots. We would move someone out of our organisation to their organisation on like a 6, 9, or 12 month secondment.
Wow.
And vice versa. They stayed on our payroll. They were still employed by us, but they did a 12-month assignment in the partner organisation. That builds massive, great connectivity with your third parties, so you have a much stronger bond to trust and engagement between your key suppliers and your own business. But it also enables your employees to take on different challenges outside of the organisation without losing them. And so creating these mechanisms, porosity, that's called, is a way that you can try and satisfy people's growth and development without losing sight of them. And it's a brilliant way of looking up.
Takes courage, lots of courage. And I think Ricardo Semler talked about that in his book Maverick. it really does work. German engineering. Brilliant. That's really good. Anything else, Stewart? Because I think we could talk about this all day long. But is there one or 2 more things you want to talk about before we sort of start wrapping up?
Well, I think there's. I think you hit the nail on the head at the start, right? This doesn't require technology, right? This is absolutely about the culture of the organisation, your leadership skills in an organisation, and how you engage with your people from across the organisation, right? And this is all about mindset. Its own right? It's about what you truly value in your organisation, and how you then facilitate that. It doesn't take money. It doesn't take time. People think coaching is a slow mechanism telling people. Invariably, that's not the case, because just because something worked for you doesn't mean it works for them.
Yep.
And if you coach someone, they might find a faster solution that's tailored to the way they think and operate, and it can get quicker results. So, coaching is an incredibly important cornerstone to this, I think.
Brilliant. Okay, so just to summarise that then, so if I'm listening to this show, I'm an owner of a medium to small size organisation, ears have pricked up, really love what you're saying. What are the 2 or 3 things I can start doing tomorrow or this week that will start moving me towards a growth mindset organisation?
Well, I think we talked about coaching. I think that'd be one. I think
Left or right?
Right. We talked about I guess how you recruit, who you recruit. I think is absolutely critical. I think if you and giving people space to make their own decisions, right? To make decisions for themselves rather than dictating. If you've got a static organisation, then mix it up, rotate people around, move them into different roles within the organisation, swap people around. It gives people a new lease of life. It creates a new sense of optimism as well. One of the things we haven't touched on, which I think is also important in all of this, is resilience. So the more you develop a growth mindset, agreeing there's great science to actually it creates a much more resilient organisation, because when things go wrong, they're much more likely to take ownership to fix things. They're much more engaged, and if you're creating that transferable skills, that sort of mixed organisation breadth, then people can then literally flex roles to take on different activities, responsibilities in a moment of crisis. So you tend to find organisations with growth mindsets are much more resilient.
Awesome. That was really interesting, Stuart. Thank you very much. And if people want to reach you, how do they get in touch with you, Stuart?
I think LinkedIn is a good place to start. You'll find me on LinkedIn. That's where most people find me. I do other podcasts and things as well. So tune into other things that's going on.
What's the podcast called?
So I work, one of the businesses I work with is called the Fellowship Responsible Business, FRB, and we do a moral maze type thing, typically on a weekly basis that people can listen to. It's all around how business can take more responsibility for their own destinies. And in today's world, that's not simple, because the stakeholders are so complex, the stakeholder needs that you're dealing with. So it's not an easy thing, and hence, we help businesses try and do that. Again, so listening to the maze, comment, challenge us and our thinking. And if people want to find me, LinkedIn is probably the best way.
Brilliant. Okay, that sounds fantastic. And thank you for your time today. Really love talking to you. You're a wealth of knowledge, and you can't do any worse than talking to this guy. So enjoy the podcast, share, like, and good luck.